Hello and welcome to Mythic Mind, where we pursue wisdom in the past between primary and secondary worlds. I'm your host, Andrew Snyder, and I am always grateful for your company. Now, first of all, I want to remind you that all of the content from the Fiction and Philosophy of C.S. Lewis course is currently available for Tier 2 patrons and higher. So that's $10 a month for about 26 lessons that covers nearly all of Lewis's main works of fiction, including the Ransom series, Screw Tape, Till We Have Faces, Great Divorce, Narnia, and more. And so head over to patreon.com/mythicmind and sign up at the tier 2 level or higher to get access to all of that content right away. And if we get 10 new patrons to that level during the month of November, then I'll continue that going with the content from the Life, Death, and Meaning with Beowulf and Boethius course. At the time that I'm recording this, we are 7 patrons away from that goal, and you can play your part by going over to patreon.com/mythicmind. And because I'm recording this a couple weeks before its public posting, we're hopefully even closer to that goal by now. But for now, I want to go ahead and jump right into our conversation today, in which I am joined by the Middle-earth Mixer, who runs a fairly high engagement account on X that is perhaps best known for ratioing large accounts with the help of the young captain of Gondor. We recently had a general and just a fun chat about Tolkien, ideology, and generally what makes Tolkien great. And I hope that you enjoy. All right, so today I'm talking with the Middle-earth Mixer. I know a lot of people who are listening are probably already kind of familiar with your content. I mean, obviously I would consider fairly high profile on Twitter, definitely a lot of engagement. And, I'd love to talk about a little bit regarding what you think you're tapping into, what you think you're offering into the Tolkien community and beyond. But I mean, before we do that, I mean, just I say you just go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit. Tell us a little bit about who you are and as much as you want to share about that and what got you connected with Tolkien to begin with.
Sure, yeah. I grew up loving The Lord of the Rings. It was something that definitely captivated my young Christian childhood. I wasn't allowed to watch Harry Potter. My mom got the memo, like a lot of the other moms did, that was out of the question. So Lord of the Rings was kind of my fantasy, and I also really liked Star Wars as well. But definitely, Lord of the Rings kind of captivated my childhood heart in a way that a lot of things just don't. And I'm not like a big fantasy person either. I've said this before on podcasts and on my Twitter before. I love Tolkien. I love C.S. Lewis. I love good literature, but I'm not going to read The Witcher just to check it out, or I don't care about other stuff. I really like what is the philosophical underpinnings of good stories, and I like to explore those. But as far as fantasy for fantasy's sake, I don't care. It's not my thing. And then as I got older, I kind of let go of that a little bit. I started to be this projection of what I thought was a cool person. And I spent a lot of my younger years being or trying to be this person that I thought was cool, or that I was supposed to be. And then I got married. And then when you get married, I feel like when you are constantly having an interaction with another person at all times, 24/7, it actually breaks down a lot of that, like those disingenuous parts of yourself. And you actually kind of get back in touch with the things, like the parts of you that are real. So I really paired with getting married, starting to really think about what I believe and why, getting back into my faith in a different way that I wasn't before. It helped me fall back in love with a lot of these things that I loved as a child. So I got really back into Lord of the Rings. And I really loved how Lord of the Rings and getting back into it was walking alongside my faith journey. Um, And Tolkien talks a lot about that in on fairy stories and how good fantasy done well can aid the religious person. And I felt that actually happening in my life. And it was something that I wanted to share with the world. I was very active on Twitter prior to me doing this whole Lord of the Rings podcast thing because I worked in political PR, so I was very active on, as you can well imagine, with um, it's you get that with me. You know, that's never going to be something that I don't bring to the table because it's my thing. Um, but I worked in political PR and I had this active Twitter page. And I remember I was on a hike with one of my friends one time. It was this place kind of by DC. It's a good hiking spot. And I was just talking about the Nazgul and the origins and how they came into being.
Right. As one
And
does on a hike. Right.
yeah, as one
Yeah.
does. And my friend, he's great. He's always like very encouraging of people's dreams and stuff. And he goes, you know, man, I would totally listen to hours of you doing this. And I mean, he had no choice, right? 'Cause we were on a hike, we're up on a mountain, he can't escape me. So I'm just talking about Lord of the Rings stuff. But I can tell he meant it. And then I was like, man, you know, what if I did? What if I did start something? And that's what kind of got the ball rolling. I started doing threads, and then a couple of my threads kind of blew up. And yeah, and then it encouraged me to buy this Yeti mic and get started.
Yeah. It really is a liberating experience when you just recognize that I can just do stuff that I want to do.
Yeah,
Like,
there's actually a great meme that's like people have been using it for Trump and running for president lately, but it didn't start with that. It's just you can just do things, and then it'll be a picture of somebody doing something crazy. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. You can just get up in the morning and just do things. You can start a
yeah.
podcast.
Yeah. I mean, it's really just kind of liberating. I mean, that was that idea that really launched a lot of my independent stuff. Like I just want to teach what I want to teach. So I start making some independent classes and now I've got a new career.
Yeah,
It's
that's amazing.
incredible.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Uh, so we'll come back around to some of the like the Tolkien and politics and that whole deal. But you said that when you were younger, Lord of the Rings really captured your imagination. So were you a reader? Was this movies? Like what did that look like?
It started off with just the movies. I think again, it was like that movie that came out that I was allowed to watch. And it was interesting because I think I was 9 or 10 and I was up late. My family was all in bed and I was watching TV. And the Fellowship of the Ring was on FX. And I was just watching it and I remember I was like, oh, kids are talking about this at school. I think it's like a Harry Potter movie or something. And I turned it on and I was immediately just gripped. It was like there was an empty socket that plugged into my brain. And I remember when they got to Rivendell in the movie, I thought the movie was over. And I was sad. The background that's happening right now. I thought that was the end of the movie. And I was like, man, that's a bummer. It's about to be over. And little did I know, it just a whole new adventure just kind of kicked off. So that's what started it, and then I became hooked, and I started consuming everything, and then I would sit and make my family, sit down and listen to me talk about the lore and bought all the video games. So I really got into it, and then um, when I got to college again, that's when I started getting back into reading, but not still not being quite as into it as I am now yet. Um, but yeah, it's been a long journey to get to this point.
See, that's fantastic. And I'm always kind of envious when I talk to people who are really captivated by Tolkien and everything he represents early on in life. It's not really something I discovered until actually like a few years ago. I
Really?
just wasn't,
You didn't
yeah, I
see the
just,
movies as a kid?
well, I saw the movies and I enjoyed them and, I played some of the games here and there, but like, it didn't hook me like on a deep life
Oh.
altering kind of level. It's still in the level of like entertainment, not like this is true. This is who I am now.
Well,
So
yeah,
it's
and
kind
you
of a
know what
surface
it
level.
you know what it was too? It wasn't to me, it wasn't just a movie because I remember it was spiritual. Like I grew up Christian, still Christian, grew up in a very much a church-going mother, and I would make all of my family sit down. And when it would get to Gandalf and the Balrog, I would stand up and I would pause it and I'd be like, okay, this is like spiritual warfare. He's taking authority over like the demon, and I'm sitting there and I'm explaining this to like my grandfather or my dad, who's like doesn't care and doesn't understand what I'm talking about, But even then, I would stand up and kind of do these grandiose. This is the most important movie ever made, like that's how I was as a kid. So, yeah, definitely captured my imagination.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it really wasn't even until I was in the midst of my doctoral dissertation when I finally discovered like literature for the first time, really. And it really did start with Tolkien.
Sorry,
It's
what was
just,
that? I didn't.
um, yeah, I was saying that it really wasn't until I was in the midst of my doctoral dissertation, like a few years ago, when suddenly I like finally discovered literature for the first time,
Oh yeah,
recognized that, yeah, because I mean, growing up, I always just kind of felt like, okay, if I'm going to read a book, I want to learn something. And so that means nonfiction, right? And so it's like, I didn't really even understand. I guess I was so inundated with sort of this modern understanding of what constitutes truth that I kind of miss the real value of literature until finally, just the right influences came at me in the right way, dealing with some personal losses. Philosophically, I'm starting to, get in touch with people like, Jordan Peterson, who does a lot with fairy tales and literature. And so I'm like, things are starting to open up for me. Finally, drawn in by largely Tolkien Twitter, that community, I finally pick up the fellowship. And just from the first chapter, the whole trajectory of my life really changed from that point forward.
yeah. No, if you read it right, and if you read it with like the right mindset, Lord of the Rings will really make you into a different person. And obviously it's not, that might sound silly. It's not the gospel. But I really do feel like God has blessed Lord of the Rings, the books and the movies. Um, it's the themes in it really walk alongside your faith. Um, and that's really what gets me so excited about it, because I think it actually truly does help people get in touch with the simple and the beautiful, but not simple in, in a haughty way, like a high and haughty person might call something simple. Just the simple things that are right in front of your face that we kind of take for granted as simple, right?
Right.
I find myself looking at trees now. and, and I was never a nature or a plant person. And now I totally am. Like I'll look at my wife and be like, look at this flower. Isn't that amazing? And she's like, yeah, I guess.
Yeah. I've had many experiences like that. And yeah, I mean, like you're saying, it's simple in the sense that, when I'm reading Lord of the Rings, it's not like I'm like learning something new theologically or philosophically that I didn't know before, but I'm encountering it in almost more of a incarnate kind of way, more of a concrete way, a way that provides not just, intellectual edification, but something like existential consolation, which is exactly what
Oh,
Tolkien talks about, right? It's that
oh
escape and
yeah.
recovery.
And I think that what's so great about it is that there is something new that you see almost every time you read it. There's treasure on every page. And this is kind of the debate that I like to have with people, about other stories. I use Game of Thrones just because I kind of like to troll people a little bit. It's fun. Game of Thrones is fun, but Tolkien really is less about the destruction of the ring, less about the embarking on of the fellowship. Those are all facets of it that make it a great story. But the real treasures are these small sentences that you see
Mhm.
randomly just sprinkled throughout, um, where it hits you like a grain of transcendent wisdom, um, that you just go, wow.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my Lord of the Rings books are all marked up and underlined, and I mean, it's as profound as I mean any classic work of philosophy or theology. Maybe not any, but it's definitely up there. It's just so much wisdom that comes out, and I think that. Well, let me just ask you, why do you think that Tolkien was able to make such art where so many Christians just come out, writing something so shallow, your pure flicks, whatever. Like, why do you think Tolkien was able to communicate such wisdom so poignantly and so authentically?
I think one of the reasons you just said, authentic, um, truly bearing one's soul on a page and not being concerned about how it's received. Um, from what we know about Tolkien, right, he was very stubborn about what was included in there. And he had a lot of people try to tell him to make edits that he didn't want to make and try to take things out that they maybe felt was not entertaining, or that would kind of make the book a little bit of a slog. Um, but Tolkien was authentic and really truly felt the things that he was writing. And I'm not saying that you have to have a tragic life to really produce works of art, but um,
It helps.
Tolkien really, it certainly helps. And he really went through a lot of pain in his life. Um, there's that famous interview where the guy asks him, well, what is Lord of the Rings about at the end of the day? And he says, death.
Right.
And I think it's less about death for death's sake. It's less about death as it is when he says death. I think he means like the human experience. Um, and when you have your mother die at such a young age, you get put into a home. Your father died when you were so young that you have pretty much no memory of him. Um, it's and then you get sent off to World War One, and you're in the trenches of World War One. It can really um, give someone who has the mind for it the ability to write something so beautiful that we can all relate to because it's real. And I also do believe that I believe it was blessed. I do. Again, it's not scripture, but I do believe it was blessed. And I think that he was tapped into something. I think that he was tapped into the Holy Spirit. I think that C.S. Lewis was. I read those works and I'm moved in ways that other things just don't. Um, so it's for a lot of different reasons that I would say it's successful, but definitely all of the things that I just named.
Yeah. And I think that in the midst of that authenticity, simply writing out of his soul, that he doesn't begin with, okay, here's the ideology that I want to put out there, right? He writes a story, and the story is true because it's coming from somebody who's grounded in the truth. And so I think that's one thing that makes
Yes.
it so real. Um, and then you talked about him writing out of sorrow, and that's really the theme that gripped me the most in my first reading of Tolkien, and probably still does. The way that he interweaves sorrow with hope and
Mhm.
meaning and joy. There's that great line from Haldir about how, although, love is now mingled with sorrow, perhaps it grows even the greater because of it. Or
Yep.
this
Yep.
one of my all-time favorite lines from Tolkien comes from the Silmarillion when he says, if joyful is the fountain that rises in the sun, its wells are in sorrow unfathomed at the foundations of the earth, or something like that. It's
Yeah.
this idea that like life, joy, and sorrow are not opposing realities, but that especially in the Christian framework, they
Oh, of
necessarily go
course.
together, right? I mean, the center of our faith is the crucified Messiah.
Yep.
And so I think that ongoing theme, the fact that all joy is rooted in sorrow, but also all sorrow is transmuted into joy. It's just such a beautiful picture of, I think, that the way that things are of Christian theology, but it's so authentic in the way that it comes out from his pen. Um,
And another thing about it too is that it's like you said, he doesn't start it with, here's what I believe. It was just something that he started writing because he had these characters, he had languages, he had frameworks for stories that he wanted to write over a long period of time. And he just started writing the story and the things that he believed were, despite anything, placed into them. Not shoehorned. They're never shoehorned. It was just these are the transcendent. These are the truths that govern my universe. These are the truths that govern the story that I'm writing. Now I'm going to start writing. and it wasn't like it was never something that had to be said because you read it and it's just reflected to you in subtle ways.
Yeah, I saw a clip going around. You may have seen it as well when interviewers asking him, you had worked out this whole world long before writing The Hobbit. Why? His response was, mm. Like
Yeah,
it's just
it's
what I
incredible. It's
did.
incredible. Like you
I,
need like the Giga Chad head. Just
right. It's like
yeah,
why not? Why not?
why not?
I mean, I think it really just speaks to Tolkien's, I mean, the fact that he can't be replicated in that, his whole world was born out of a desire to make sense out of this language that he created,
Yeah,
which, usually fantasy after him is going to go the other way around, where, okay, we'll shoehorn some languages in here. But no, it's, I have this little just obsession, something that interests me. I'm going to pursue it. And then out of that, we get the whole world.
yeah. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing, and it's not. It's as you said, it can't be replicated because it's just not. Um, People aren't like that typically, and that's what makes him so incredible. It's like this was his side hobby, his side hustle, and he already was such an amazing, talented person. And then to just start this and then have that be the thing that you're known for instead of all the work that you were doing at Oxford is just truly incredible. Like there's people who don't even know he's a professor.
Oh, I know. It's crazy. And C.S. Lewis kind of talks about this that when you're like hyper engaged, then fantasy, like writing fantasy, even kind of becomes a way of escape, and that now you can sort of play around with the things that you take really seriously during the day. And I think that one thing that we tend to forget is that a lot of people who want to go out and write their fantasy novel, they end up essentially becoming knockoffs, right? Cheap imitations, because in order to write something like Tolkien did, to write something even like Lewis did, like you have to be engaged in the logos that makes for good stories, right?
Oh
You have to
yeah.
be doing that hard work. That if they weren't busy reading like the great works of Northern literature or whatever, like we would never get these products. And so, on one hand, they're both geniuses in their own rights in that they were able to spin out these different stories, these different worlds, but also there were geniuses that were again plugged into like the logos that goes beneath all great stories, the kind of the spirit of truth, I guess. And that's
Yeah.
something that you can't really just skip.
And we'll also, and this is where actually where Tolkien and Lewis intersect with my part of part of what kindled the obsession is my love for history too. And I love that the both of them loved history. And in order to, Tolkien particularly set out to write a myth, right? He wanted to write a great myth, a myth that could sort of have been something that was, pre-Arthurian England, like that. That's what he was going for. And he was able to write a great myth because he loved it so much. If you don't love myth, you can't really write one. You can't write your own. But it's because him and Lewis both had this respect for, not seeing pre-Christian myth as sort of this thing to not pay attention to and not appreciate some of the good parts, some of the virtues that you can derive from those stories. Um, because they chose to open their minds up to like what good can I receive from this story that is inherently flawed because it's not the truth, it's just a reflection of the ultimate truth. The virtues that are good are just reflections of the ultimate truth, but it's okay for me to appreciate the good parts of them. And because they were open to that, which is the same kind of person I am, I think that really contributed to both of their abilities to write well and tell good stories.
Yeah, I often reference this line from Lewis's Paralandrum when he says that he finally discovered what mythology was. It was gleams of celestial strength falling on a jungle of perversion and imbecility. And so it's like
Hmm.
there's
Hmm.
good stuff there, even if it's all mixed up in some things that we need to kind of extricate it from and bring it back into its proper context. Which
Yes,
this is
I see you. I
really
see you post a lot about the space trilogy. I love the space trilogy.
yeah. I mean, that's another thing. Like just like a couple years ago, I discovered it for the first time, and that's another thing that just became part of who I am moving forward. I can never look up at the stars the same way again.
Well, it's really
Um,
funny to tell people about it because they're like, C.S. Lewis wrote a space trilogy? And I'm like, yeah, but it's also kind of a fantasy. And you can read the third one as its own book. You don't even need to read the first two, but you should read the first two.
Right. And then, I mean, you try to summarize the plot and it's just absolutely insane, but it works.
Yeah, and I think that there's like a, it's funny because there's a hard dividing line between people who really, really like that hideous strength and people who really don't like it and just do not connect or understand it at all whatsoever. And I think one of the reasons why it resonated with me so much is because, I worked in PR. So I worked in PR. So I have this kind of resentment for the drawbacks of journalism and propaganda. And we know like Mark gets used as a propagandist on behalf of the nice. But I also, I saw a lot of, so I was in DC for a while, and I saw a lot of the worst parts of myself in Mark's character. This just deep, flawed desire to be seen as smart and liked by the in crowd of people that you think are important. So that book was a crazy journey for me. But anyway, I digress. I went off too long
No,
on.
no, yeah. I will say that that hideous strength did instantly click with me in that, it begins with sort of, these boring college meetings and progressive cliques that eventually you find are rooted in the depths of hell, which, I mean, that's my everyday life.
Yeah, you're a professor.
Right. In a, humanities department. So I definitely know how all that goes.
Yeah,
Uh, but so back to Tolkien. We've talked a lot about how what makes him so great is the fact that he's grounded in these eternal, transcendent realities. Now, that being said, it seems pretty obvious that he has like a definitely a conservative grounding. And I don't just mean like modern American politics, but I mean that in the sense that he is latched onto enduring realities that are worth conserving, worth holding on to, or rather, we need to let them hold on to us, I guess. Um,
100%.
so why do you think that mainstream Tolkien community tends to be very left leaning? I mean, Tolkien Society or wherever. Like, what do you think is at
Yeah,
the
I mean, I
heart of
think I can tell you exactly why I think that that's a phenomenon that we see a lot of. I think a lot of these people start off really kind of in the same vein that we're in. I really don't know how you can't like you don't start off that way. Not everyone, but most of them, most of these um, people who I won't call them sellouts, but um, really just kind of fall on the left side of interpreting Tolkien. I think they start off in a lane of probably a religious person, someone who comes from a religious background, someone who, really fell in love with Lord of the Rings growing up. And then they find themselves in taking the academic route, particularly the people who self-identify as Tolkien scholars. Um, they are in humanities group. Yeah, yeah. I don't have to tell you. They're in humanities circles, which skew far left across the board. Uh, no offense.
Oh, none taken.
So because they want to be accepted in these circles, and they want funding for whatever they're doing. They want recognition. They want good jobs. I mean, Tolkien professor who I don't know Corey. I know he's done great work, so like I'm not going to get on here and bash him. But if I spent the amount of time in my life doing the stuff that Corey was doing, and now finally I have a major corporation that is putting me in front of a camera and telling me to do interviews and make videos for them and paying me to show up at amazing events. I understand why you would start kind of bending and breaking your views to kind of fit whatever they would want you to say. So again, I'm sure he's a great guy and I'm not trying to bash him. I understand the desire. Um, but I think that that's kind of the path that a lot of these people walk on is they really just want to be accepted in the intellectual circles that they're in. They want to be taken seriously. Now, all of a sudden, the Rings of Power is coming out. They're being taken very seriously. Um, because I think a lot of people who don't really know about fantasy think that fantasy is silly. So they've spent a lot of their life, feeling like people don't think something is really cool. Now all of a sudden, it's really cool. Um, so I think it's pretty simple, pretty simple human interaction. And I don't hate them, but I definitely I go a little bit hard on them on Twitter. But at the end of the day, it's just people being people. I don't think it's a big mystery.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that that whole trajectory you just laid out brings us right back to that hideous strength, I suppose. Right?
Yeah.
That's Mark Studdick. That's how you get to the NICE.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
now,
And
kind of
and
on.
particularly
Oh, go ahead.
with the Tolkien. Sorry, I was just going to say
No,
with the
go ahead.
Tolkien Society, they're like a. I don't know how where they're getting their funding from or what the donations thing looks like, but they're definitely all literature academics who are trying to kind of not offend anybody and um, I actually can't even look at their stuff anymore because they have me blocked.
Yeah, I've never really paid that much attention to them, but every once in a while I'll see like the lineup of the titles for their conferences, and it's just, I mean, it's just insane.
Yeah,
That
it really is.
right, these people claim to be experts on Tolkien and the kinds of things that they come up with, and I think that this also just speaks to academic culture in general. That if you're going to be if you're going to have a place in academic society, then you're pushed to constantly publish. In order to publish, you have to be innovative, right? You have to say something that hasn't been said before. And so there's this push of I have to always be original, but the the putting originality at the forefront of your academic drive is not a good way to land at good academics. It's not a
Yeah,
way to pursue truth, right? It's a way to market yourself, which leads to all kinds of just absurdities. This obviously isn't relegated just to the Tolkien spheres. It's the problem that I have with academia in general is that it just pushes you to always be original, which is not the same thing as pushing you to be wise or to help
yeah,
other people be wise.
exactly, 100%.
Um,
I was thinking about that. It's like nobody wants to hear. We already know what Lord of the Rings is about, right? We know where
right.
Tolkien stood. They'll lie and say that oh, he would have been progressive on this. No, he wouldn't have. We know what Lord of the Rings is, and we know that it's pushing these sort of you know Christian Western uh, virtue, these Christian Western virtues. That's what Lord of the Rings is really propping up at the end of the day. And no one really wants to hear about that anywhere. Um, None of these
Right.
intellectual circles want to discuss this because to them, even if they're not openly hostile towards it, it's like we've heard this before.
Right. It's just always that desire of I want something new. It reminds me of that line from Mythopoeia where he talks about, progressing into the void, that, we're just constantly moving, but into nothingness because,
Exactly.
a lot of times you see the same people who don't believe there is such a thing as, transcendent eternal truth. And so at that point, like, what can you even progress toward if you don't have an endpoint in mind? There's nothing concrete. It's like Lewis says that if you're trying to see through everything, then eventually you just don't see anything. That the purpose of a window is to see something concrete on the other side. But if you don't think there is anything concrete, then like, what are you even doing? Um,
Yeah. Or how Gandalf's line about it being foolish to break something just so you can understand it better. That's what they're doing with Tolkien every day. A lot of them, not all of them, but they're doing this dissection of things that shouldn't be looked at through the lens that they're trying to see it.
right, right. And so Gandalf says he likes white more, right? Because it's this unifying reality. It's pointing us upwards, on the other side of the prism to what actually is. I mean, there's that one letter where he says explicitly that the Lord of the Rings is not about freedom. It's about God's sole right to divine honor. He
Yep.
says like that's what it's about.
Yep. Yeah. And then people like will log on and say that it's not, it has nothing to do with religion. You're like,
Right, there is. But I guess that's when you have to fall on like the death of the author idea. He doesn't have
Yeah.
authority over his own words, or I don't know. It gets silly.
No one's allowed to do that to Lord of the Rings. I can do it to other people's stuff, but no one can do it to Lord of the Rings.
That's right. Now, I guess in line with, I mean, politics, ideology. I mean, I'm sure that one of the big criticisms you get is mixing Tolkien with politics, right?
All the time,
So,
almost
like,
every day.
what's your response to that? Whether you give it out loud or in your own head, like, how do you respond to that?
Well, I think it's there are people who would tell you to read Lord of the Rings, read the Silmarillion, read the Children of Horn, read all of Tolkien's letters, study them, know them, memorize them. But don't you dare learn anything about how he felt about the world he was living in and about maybe how the themes that he reflects in Lord of the Rings might make you feel about things that are happening in our world today. Absolutely not. Don't do that. That's a no-no. Now, I think to me, it's absolutely ridiculous to take something as substantial as Lord of the Rings, where constant themes are being reflected at you on every page, beautiful things. I mean, I'm just thinking now, one of my favorite lines from Tolkien is where he talks about digging up the evil out of the fields that you know, so that those who come after can have clean earth to till. Like, even that statement in and of itself is like, it's differentiating between good and evil and telling you that you don't have to go out and do anything crazy, but go out into your community and uproot evil in the fields that you know. That in and of itself is a problematic statement if you just have sort of this subjective approach towards morality in general. So I don't understand people, because I'm just not that person. I don't understand people who can consume content and not analyze the morality and the themes that are being reflected back at you. I can know that something is not good. I can know that something doesn't necessarily have a good message, and I can turn that part of my brain off and still take something in and enjoy it. But I still know what values are being projected at me. And when I read Lord of the Rings, I'm not turning that switch off. I know what values are being projected at me. I love those values. And I want to share them with others because that's the type of personality that I am. And if you want to be inauthentic, uh, that's fine. That's up to you. But you need to admit that you are actually turning a part of your brain off when you choose to read things in that way. And it's not the kind of person I am.
The Mythic Mind Fellowship presents a new study led by Dr. Andrew Snyder, The Wisdom of Middle-earth, The Lord of the Rings. This will be the first study in the Wisdom of Middle-earth series, which seeks to bring an array of companions together with a common desire of growing in wisdom while enjoying the heartening tales of the great tale weaver, J.R.R. Tolkien. The Lord of the Rings is a profound tale that has literally changed lives, as it has for mine. And what is it that makes this story so powerful and so compelling? It is because Tolkien's stories are fundamentally true, and those who engage with it know exactly what I mean. They speak to the way that things are. As Peter Kreeft said in The Philosophy of Tolkien, the Lord of the Rings is infused with the same light that illumined the man who wrote it, and that light is true, for it reveals the reality of the world and life. So join us on this adventure. Let us grow in wisdom together through immersion in this tale, not through cheap allegorizing, but by getting a better understanding of the ideas and the movements of the heart that bring a tale such as this to life. This 12-week study will begin with Tolkien's creation account, the Ainulindale, and then move to the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring. Each week will include assigned reading from the Lord of the Rings, a short side lesson at the beginning of the week that addresses a relevant theme, background story, or secondary text. And then, once you've had some time to do the reading, There will be a longer video that serves as a guide in these forests of wisdom. Also, we will have additional recommended readings, an active Discord channel, and weekly live meetings, which will be recorded in case you cannot attend. Whether you are reading The Lord of the Rings for the first time or the 11st time, I invite you to join our company. Prices are currently as low as they ever have been, and they are as low as they ever will be, so go ahead and join today at andrewsnyder.podia.com. And I hope to see you on this road that goes ever on. Yeah, and the reality is that anybody, whether they have high profile or not, anybody who's commenting on Tolkien or anything really, they're projecting some ideology at play here, right? The question is, is it actually befitting of the subject that they're dealing with? But there's no way to escape it. And so all of these claims of like radical subjectivity or, you can't take anything from anything and apply it to something else, like it's always such a inconsistent critique. It's like at my university classes, pretty much all my students will tell me there's no such thing as truth, there's no such thing as morality, everything's just opinions, all made up. And then I ask them, how many of you are intending to vote in the next election? And most of them raise their hand. It's like, do you not see any inconsistency here? That you're going to go from literally like the same day you can tell me that the worst thing you can do is to impose values on somebody else, and then you need to go vote on which values you can impose on your neighbors. Like, do you not see the inconsistency there? Or,
Absolutely.
even the fact that you're just arguing for anything whatsoever, even that there is no truth or, everything's subjective. You're trying to apply a truth claim to me in that very statement. And so pretty much all these critiques just sort of fall apart into absurdity.
Yeah. And I mean, I do understand some of the criticism, right? Because I get very upset when people try to deconstruct Tolkien or say that he would have had views that he wouldn't have had, or say that this doing. I mean, just an example, like the people who do queer readings of Lord of the Rings. I mean, like um, they do that and then they write about it and then they make these arguments for what this means and what that means and what Tolkien really like may have meant about a specific interaction between two characters, and it's like that drives me nuts. So if someone has sort of a leftist point of view and they see me extracting and speaking on behalf of Tolkien in ways that they don't think that he would have agreed with, I do understand some level of outrage there. The difference is, however, is that I'm right. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, I am, but like I'm not. I'm just kidding. Um, no, I understand why people would kind of get upset about that, but I just really, I mean, we know Tolkien and we know what his positions were, and we know not on policy, but we know where he stood. So you can extract some level of confidence on how he might have felt on certain issues today. But that's not the point. Is like when I say something political on Twitter, that's coming from me. I'm not saying Tolkien would have agreed with this. It's just because, again, that was my first love, politics. That's what I used to work in. I don't work in it anymore because it's not. I don't recommend anyone work in politics, but that's what you're going to get because that's just reflected in who I am. And I think, you talked about my page resonating with people. I appreciate you saying that. Um, I think that my page does resonate with people because people are looking for more authenticity in their lives. And I'm not saying I'm the most authentic person in the world, but if you look at a lot of the Tolkien accounts or Tolkien channels, a lot of them make great stuff. I mean, Nerd of the Rings, he's amazing. So I'm not attacking him or like Men of the West or anybody like that. But they keep it strictly Lord of the Rings, which is good because that's all they're trying to do. But sometimes people like to see a little bit of the self leak in, and see where you stand on stuff. And and how you feel about things. And people like that because everything now is so we live in the social media age where everything is so manufactured. People have AI that are making posts for them now, on a regular basis. Um, so when you get someone who is really just being kind of vulnerable every day, people like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that people want to connect with people and not just platforms.
Exactly.
Um, right. And people obviously engage in the world. And so, yeah, I think that is something that you definitely bring to the table, as well as, ratioing President of the United States or whoever else, which is all good fun.
Yeah,
Um,
we had a good time.
yeah, yeah. And honestly, I think that speaks to something that it's good just to kind of have fun, even when you're dealing with serious things. I think that
Yeah.
speaks to a lot of people as well. Um, so, other than Lord of the Rings, I mean, what is your favorite Tolkien story?
My favorite Tolkien story. It's difficult because it kind of changes all the time. Um, my my background favorite, that kind of transcends all the other favorites, is obviously Gandalf's. Just the entire exchange between Gandalf and the Balrog.
Mm,
Um, Everything that makes it so significant, all of the background information and lore that goes into that exchange, the words that Gandalf speaks, the way that the Balrog reacts, the impending battle, the underground fight, the chase up to the peak, um, and Gandalf's, death and then coming back. Like it's all such a significant sequence that I think really captures how deep Lord of the Rings is in one exchange. And it's really one of the pathways that I really like to use to engage with other people because everyone knows you shall not pass.
mm,
It's like it's the most iconic scene in Lord of the Rings. Um, Everyone references it in pop culture. So it's also a great catalyst for having these more deeper, like spiritual and philosophical discussions about Lord of the Rings. Because you get to look at something and be like, hey, that's a great scene, right? Yeah, Gandalf kind of fighting this monster, right? That's cool. But also, let me tell you about the spiritual significance about what's happening in this exchange. Because when you know that, that makes it so much cooler. So that's kind of like my background favorite story. However, right now, my favorite story is I really love. Oh, I also love when Fingolfin fights Morgoth. That's another
of course,
background
of
favorite
course.
story. But that's everybody loves that. I really love when Sam is in Mordor with Frodo, and Frodo is passed out, and they're at their lowest point of despair. And Sam looks up and he sees a star punching through. And he has this kind of inner monologue where he thinks about how this shadow is just a passing thing. That's what one of the quotes that gets loaded into the
Hmm.
um, the Two Towers speech. Um, there's light that is so far out of the bounds and governance of evil, so beyond it that it really just dwarfs it in comparison. Like evil does not have the authority to even reach up and touch it. Um, I love that quote. I love that sequence. I love that story. Um, and I really like how it actually connects with, I don't know if you've read The Children of Horin, but
Oh yeah.
yeah, Horin has his exchange with Morgoth, where he kind of essentially says the same thing to him. Like after my soul exits the bounds of the world, you can't touch it. You can't touch me because there's goodness beyond that you have no authority or power over. Um, and it's a great exchange because Morgoth essentially tries to lie and say that there's nothing out there. There's nothing for you to look forward to. And Horan rejects this, which is just, I mean, only a spiritual exchange. I mean, those are the types of inner battles that we have on a regular basis. So I really like that one. That's probably my current, besides like the ones with real staying power that never go anywhere. That's my favorite.
Yeah, those are definitely good ones. Yeah, the Children of Hurin definitely is a lasting favorite of mine. It's just so heroic, but so tragic, and it's the kind of book where you get to the end and you just feel empty, but also full. I don't know. He captures the northern tragic spirit so well,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
that's part of the bigger story that is destined for you catastrophe, and so it's tragedy amidst a story of ultimate hope. And it's just
Yes.
something so powerful there.
Yes, I have a love-hate relationship with the Children of Morn because I like everything to line up and have a good conclusion, right? And the Children of Horn, essentially, even though it is its own standalone story, um, Torin was going to eventually be redeemed in one of the versions of
Hmm.
the Last Battle. However, that's only one of the versions of the Last Battle, and it was never really thoroughly fleshed out. So it's like you get this, you read The Children of Horn, and it's amazing, but then you kind of have this. It feels like a loose end, when you get done. So it's like I love it, and then it makes me so mad.
Yeah,
Um,
it's pretty devastating.
yeah.
Uh, yeah,
But
there's
it really does capture that northern spirit and that tragedy, that sort of classic approach to myth.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's that great line between Morgoth and Huron where Huron says, you've wasted your strength in your own emptiness, or something to that effect. And that just cuts really at this central idea to Tolkien that all the bad guys, Morgoth, Sauron, Sauron, like all the villains of the story are these people who reach out for power, but in so doing, they're grasped by power. And so they really just fall into this emptiness of self-worship. And in so doing, they essentially become nothing. And this gets back to the fact that, basically the whole story is about God's sole right to divine honor. Those who recognize the good that stands above and beyond them, those who are able to see that star shining forth into the forsaken land, right? Those are the people who are able to latch on to real, enduring meaning and joy, regardless of their circumstance. And so it's all about, who or what are you living for? Um,
Yeah, but and I love that. I love that about not Tolkien and Lewis. I feel like
mhm.
their villains at the end of the day are rather pathetic. When you take all things into consideration, they're very ugly, and they sometimes can wield great power, but at the end of the day, they're really they've laid themselves low and become and they every day they spend um, not living in the way that they were originally set to live. They become weaker and weaker and weaker, and every evil thing just continues to take them further and further away from their original
Mhm.
purpose. Um, I love that about
Yeah,
Tolkien.
there's this line from Augustine that comes to mind in City of God when he says that the good man, though a slave, is free, whereas the wicked, though he may rule, is a slave. And what's worse is he's a slave to as many masters as he has vices.
Mm,
And so it's in this pursuit of ourselves, our self-referential good, we just become enslaved to our passions and we're no longer free. Um,
absolutely.
it Freedom requires laying down the ring.
Yeah. Yep.
Um,
Yeah, that's actually one of the things. And if you put this on Twitter, we'll stir the pot a little bit. One of the things that I actually liked about the Rings of Power was Slime Sauron. I really enjoyed that. Not because the book says that Sauron is slime, but I enjoyed it because it really lined up with this theme of two things. One is at the end of the day, the enemies is actually pathetic. I mean, truly pathetic. And like when you see the real true self, when everything else is stripped away, there's really nothing there. He's this sort of this slop. And another thing I really liked about it, and this is going off the spiritual topic a little bit, but the structure of power in Tolkien's world is different from the structure of power in other fantasy worlds, right? Where people, if you look at Harry Potter, they're turning things into chocolate bars, that are, and they seemingly can do this a never-ending amount of times, right? As long as they say the right words, something happens. Whereas in Tolkien's world, things are they require energy, and beings actually become exhausted, right? Because they are originally created as, particularly the Maya and the Valar. They're created as these thoughts and reflections of Iluvatar's ultimate power, right? And that's where all of their power derives. So if you look at someone like Sauron, um, he comes, whatever power he has, really is transitive from Iluvatar. And each thing that he does, each evil thing that he does, really just further lessens that original reflection of Iluvatar's thought that he's supposed to be. So there's cost for all these things that he does. Um, so I liked that was a part. I went on a tangent there. So we'll kick this up. Get some people mad in the replies. I actually liked that they had him go through this whole having to recreate a whole body thing, because it takes work, right? And that's what differentiates Tolkien's legendarium and where the power comes from other.
Yeah, and so my promo for this episode is now going to be Mixer endorses Rings of Power, by the way.
Yeah, please don't. Please don't.
So,
You know who did that to me? OneRing.com did that to me.
really,
Yeah, the boys. I love them. I love those guys over there. Jonathan.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he hit me. He roasted me pretty hard and made that the thumbnail of his video.
That's great. It's a good way to get some clicks. I mean, with Rings of Power, I mean, we don't need to spend a whole conversation on that now, but I mean, generally speaking, I don't like it as a Tolkienist. I
Right.
like it relative to what is out there today, its main competitors in the popular media. In
100%.
that, I think that even an echo of Tolkien or an echo of an echo of Tolkien is going to be better than most of what's out there today regarding just basic morality.
Yeah. So this is actually one of the points that I like to make is that when you see studios that are saying things, because again, I care about philosophical underpinnings, right? I knew going into the show that they were going to butcher the lore. It was never even a question in my mind.
Sure.
Like I knew going in, I was like, this is not going to add up. So because I went in with that expectation, really what I cared about at the end of the day is, are they going to try and deconstruct Tolkien? Are they going to put things in here that shouldn't be in here? Um, subjective approaches to morality. Like, am I going to be seeing that? And I mean, it hasn't been perfect, but I will say that, like, I think when people make projects where you see actual good philosophical messaging, good messaging on morality. There's a couple really good speeches in there that I really liked, in, I think it was the last episode or the second to the last episode of season two, where Celebrimbor is kind of giving the speech to Galadriel, like he admits his mistake. There's gold in there. And you
Hmm.
watch it and you're like, wow, no other show is saying anything like this. So I would like to give them props for that. And I think that when studios come out with stuff that actually has good messaging, you should clap for that. Because maybe they'll lean into it more. However, Rings of Power obviously has some serious lore problems that are inexcusable. So there's a balancing act you have to do. Like, clap for the philosophical messaging, but also Elrond should not be kissing Galadriel at any point.
Yeah,
Uh,
they do some weird stuff for no good
yeah,
reason.
and there's no way you can really spin that. Like you can't. It was unnecessary to the point where it almost feels like you're trying to agitate me.
Yeah,
Um,
I do think it's kind of humorous that some of the same people who are trying to defend the show saying that was entirely platonic are the same people that are going to argue that something's going on with Frodo and Sam. So it's
yeah,
like something doesn't add up here.
yeah, no, it's all just whatever. It's fitting whatever you want it to be to match up with your argument.
Right. But yeah, so I think we're pretty much on the same page with that. Overall, it's pretty good relative to its competitors at the very least. Um, well, Uh, we're going a little over an hour. Is there anything else that you think that we should hit on, or anything else that you want to bring up?
Probably not anything that we could really unpack. I could give a whole review of Rings of Power, but definitely save that for another time.
Sounds good.
Trying to think. Anything else? Any other questions?
No, I mean, I think that we've.
Sometimes I go on. Donald Trump has this great line where he talks about how he weaves sometimes.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
Occasionally I will weave. So I hope I gave you some good content.
No, it's a good weaving, good weaving. I think we've weave together something something useful.
Perfect. Sounds good.
All right. All right. Well, and I'd love to do this again sometime, maybe with some specific topic in mind, but
I'd love to.
yeah, sounds good. All right. Well, appreciate it. Everyone go follow Middle Earth Mixer if you don't already.
Thank you.
Thanks again for listening, and thank you to all of my patrons who make this show and my various other endeavors possible. And by name, I would like to thank all Tier 2 patrons and higher, and so many thanks to Mark Cliff, Aaron D., Paul William, Aaron S., Andrew G., Andrew M., Brandon, Christopher, Emmy, Ian, Jeremiah, Jocelyn, Josh T., Joshua B., Matthew, Sarah, and Steele. And again, I am recording this a couple weeks before the public posting, and so if more of you have joined since then that's why you're left off this time, but you will make it next time. I really do love doing this sort of thing. I would love to be able to consistently provide you with an episode a week, indefinitely moving forward, and maybe even more often than that, but I can't do it without your support. And so, if you appreciate what I do and you want more of it, then please go to patreon.com/mythicmind and join the fellowship. And you can find that link in the show notes. And especially at that second tier and higher, there's never been as much available Mythic Mind content as there is right now. And so go ahead and make that happen. That's it for now, and I hope that you tune in next week for our next conversation, which will be available even sooner, ad-free for our patrons. But that's it for now, and so until next time, Godspeed.